This is Diana Maul Halstead, the Kriegie's daughter, and it is my honor to introduce a man whose journey began in the small mining town of Dos Cabezas, Arizona. He wanted more for his life than this small town could offer, and the day he stepped into the United States Army set him on a path that would span almost 25 years of distinguished service. The military gave him the opportunity to excel, and he embraced every challenge placed before him. Today, Francisco Moreno shares the story of that journey, shaped by determination, duty, and the extraordinary life he built through service. Frank, welcome to the Barbed Wire Hotel. Let's start with, where did you grow up?
The place where I was born is about 200 miles from here in the southeastern part of the state in the Wilcox area. There's a little mining town called Dos Cabezas, meaning in Spanish it's two heads, because there's two peaks that are the landmark for the area. But it was a mining town where my dad was a miner. That's where I grew up, and I spent my first 17 years until I joined the Army.
What kind of miner was he?
He mined for copper and gold. Huge operations. He was there during the time when gold and copper were peaking, and large conglomerates came out there and did the mining. They brought in the big machinery, and then about the time that I was in my teens, they had hauled all the equipment out. There was nothing left. They had stripped the mines of everything, and any work going on in the mines was done by a single miner working for the owner. And my dad was one of those single miners.
What was your family dynamic like?
I had two brothers. I had Robert and Fred. That's three of us, three boys, and I have five sisters. I lost one brother to pancreatic cancer about 10 years ago. I'm the only one that lives in the Phoenix area. My sisters live in Tucson.
You went into the Army?
I did. At the time I got out of high school, Wilcox offered nothing to me, and I was like most kids, I guess, reluctant to leave the house and go out and try to make a living somewhere else. I had no place to go in Wilcox, no work there, and Tucson was the closest place, and I didn't know anyone in Tucson, and I was reluctant to go by myself. So I thought the best option for me was to join the Army, and that's essentially what I did.
You were in 17. What year was that?
In 1956. Korea was winding down. As a matter of fact, as I went in the Army, the guys that I met there in the lower ranks were all veterans of Korea. So they were all coming back, and they were rotating units back out of Korea, and they were joining the units here in the States.
Where did you enlist?
I enlisted in Phoenix, as a matter of fact. They brought me down here and I signed up, and then they gave me a couple weeks to get myself ready and ship out. And so 2 weeks later, I was on my way to Fort Hood, Texas for my basic training.
What made you choose the Army?
I wanted to be a paratrooper. I had cousins who were in Korea, as a matter of fact, and both of them were paratroopers, and they recruit you, they talk good stuff to you and sounded good, and that's what I thought I wanted to be in, so that's why I joined.
So you went to basic training in Fort Hood.
Yes.
And you spent 8 weeks there?
Yes, I spent 8 weeks there to begin with for basic training. Then I had signed up for the 101st Airborne Division. They wanted to give me advanced training. They sent me to Augusta, Georgia for high-speed radio operations and high-speed radio training. And after 8 weeks of that, I came to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where the 101st Airborne Division was. And that's where I got my advanced training.
Your advanced training was in the high-speed radio?
Right.
What is a high-speed radio?
It was radio that was communications at the higher levels in the division, and the radio teletype and Morse code. It was to learn to operate in highly tactical areas that required a lot of mobility, which was the 101st Airborne Division was known for. And once I got there, that's really all I did. Just we trained and maneuvered out in the field, practicing. And of course, like being with an airborne unit, I had to make my monthly jump to stay current. To me, that was fun. You have to stay rated as a paratrooper. So that's why every month you have to make a jump. And so on any given day, they will line it up, schedule units to make their jump. Take, for example, if there was 4 companies or 5 companies in my battalion, they would schedule one company and all of us That day we'd go out and we'd hop on an airplane, they'd take us flying around, they'd come back, go on the jump zone to make our jump, and then come back in. That took care of us for that month.
So you only got to jump one time a month?
Mm-hmm.
Did that fill your desire to jump out of a perfectly good airplane?
Oh, I was young and it was something that was challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thrill of the whole thing was really what drives a lot of youngsters.
Where did you get your paratrooper training?
There at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I spent 3 weeks in jump school. So they had a jump school and I went through that one and got qualified and then reported to my unit.
Did you like jump school?
I knew it was just something I had to do, and so I took it on. And physically, I was fit, and I really liked it.
After you finished in Kentucky, where did you go?
I just stayed there and did different things. Like I said, they schedule maneuvers during the course of the year, whether it be in the winter or in the summer, and then we'd go into different maneuver areas. On the camp itself, it's a huge, huge base. I mean, we're talking about acres and acres of land that they occupy there for the entire base. And so we were able to move complete units out into the field and form one as an aggressor and one as a defender and pit one against the other.
So you were training
Yes.
to be ready?
Right.
This was still in 1957?
Yes.
How long were you there?
I was there until 1959.
Oh, so you were in Kentucky for 2 years?
Yes. And so I went through and finished that term, and that was my first hitch, and I came back to Wilcox, and again, I didn't find anything there, and I had enjoyed my time in the service. My last assignments with the 101st Airborne Division was we went for an event as a unit and put a demonstration jump on for the civilians in Pittsburgh. I really enjoyed that one, and we got out of the military course and allowed us to mingle with the civilians. They turned us loose after the exercise and met some people up there, and I thought that's where I'd like to go back to at the time. And so when I got back out of the Army, I was here for 3 or 4 weeks and decided that I didn't like it here. The work that was available was hard labor. I could go to work at a service station. I couldn't see myself spending the rest of my life working service station work. And so I looked around and found they had rock quarries where they were bagging up crushed rock and selling it. And I thought, well, I can handle that, but a week of work at that rate, that type of work, just wears you out. And I didn't see my body holding up for the rest of my life doing that sort of stuff. So I went back to the recruiter and asked him what they had available for me. And they offered me the Air Defense School and I could go back to Pittsburgh. To me, it just sounded like a leisurely enough exercise. So that would be working in like a headquarters where they plot all air traffic around the metropolis area. And we had defensive missile sites all around Pittsburgh, almost at the height of the Cold War. And so they were assigning missile sites all along the major metropolitan areas in the United States. And we could almost have a pick of any city we wanted to go to because they were military units that were being formed there. And I went into Pittsburgh and stayed there for, really, it didn't last. I think it was in 1960. I got an opportunity to leave Pittsburgh and go to Jacksonville because the Naval Air Station there they were forming up air defense unit there and new command in Georgia. And so I joined that unit and was stationed at Jacksonville. From there on, that's where I met my wife. I settled down there, and after a few years there, I think it seems to be, it would have been 1961, 62. In 62, I got orders to go to Europe. From there, I went from Jacksonville Naval Air Station, and I was shipped out to Germany in Nuremberg, where the Army had another air defense unit. I joined that air defense unit, and from there on I was just working in different headquarters as an intelligence specialist, learning where the enemy units were deployed and tracking those, and my job was to plot them and show them on maps for the commander to be able to read. And that's where, after a year or so there, I had my family join me. But in the early 60s, 61, 62, the Army opened up the flight school looking for people that would be willing to volunteer to go to Vietnam. And so I thought there again, I thought this is great. I get to fly. So I went on and they gave me my orientation flight in a helicopter, asked me if I was interested. I put in my application, and I did it, and I was accepted almost overnight. And so I came back to Fort Walters, Texas, and it's no longer there. That's where the basic helicopter school was. Then I went from Fort Walters. That was the advanced stage of my training. I don't remember how long it was, but it was well over 8 weeks. And then the advanced training was in the bigger helicopters, and went to Fort Rucker, Alabama.
What type of helicopters were those?
On the basics, I had the single rotor aircraft with one passenger. You have the pilot and the passenger. That's all you had. Very small. It was the OH-13 and the OH-23. The OH-13 was known for its service in Korea, where they were able to evacuate casualties by laying on the skids outside and pull them out that way. And that's the only way they could carry out casualties. Or I guess you could carry them. If you could sit them up, they could sit next to the pilot or something like that. It had a big bubble on it, And so it had a very weak engine, so it couldn't carry much of a load. Then the unit that I went to in Vietnam, we got the OH-23. I was flying the OH-23 in basic training at Fort Walters, Texas. The OH-13 and the OH-23, which were basic trainers, were both reciprocating engine, they're gas engine driven. We used the OH-23 for scout ships in the first unit I went to within Vietnam. But they were very vulnerable to enemy fires, very slow. And so I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, where I had this huge, monstrous H-19. And that was a big cargo helicopter that they had for Korea. And that was a beast because it had been designed around surplus airplane engines with 2 rows of 9 radial engines, but it was 9 cylinders stacked on 9 cylinders. They designed it so that the drive shaft on the engines went up and came up between the pilots and then to the transmission and then up into the rotor. The engine was laying up in the front. And so on the side of the exhaust, it would blind you at night when you let up on the gas and were landing and idling. Boy, that exhaust would come out of there. It would blind you. It was quite an experience. So anyway, I look back on it now because it required me to fly, I think, it was 25 hours, I think, in it, of training. And then I soloed. You go out and fly a few patterns by yourself, so you're solo. And soloed at night. And I thought, how in the world did I ever even take that on? Because you as a youngster, you just say, oh, this is great. I mean, I can do this all night, But you look back on it now and it makes me wonder. How is it we accept that sort of thing? But anyway, it was fun. I loved it. I loved flying throughout. And then we graduated at Fort Rucker, Alabama, into the turbine engines, which was the UH-1A, the B, but it was mostly A. But that was our introduction into turbine engines. And qualified on those and graduated. And I reported to Fort Benning, Georgia, where the 11th Air Assault Division was forming up. And the 11th Air Assault Division was a unit that was designed with 2 aviation assault battalions. And the division had 400 helicopters. And they were all of the latest model of the UH-1 that we were getting. We were getting the UH-1D. It was designed to carry 7 soldiers. It was not all that efficient to begin with because the engine wasn't all that powerful, but we learned to work with it. The Bell people, as they went along, they got better at refining the engine and it got stronger as we went along. And by the time I had left the Army, they were up to the H model, UH-1H. On my second tour into Vietnam, I flew the AH-1G Cobra, so that was really a powerful engine on that one. Well, getting back to Fort Benning, where the 11th Air Assault Division was training, I spent 18 months training with the 11th Air Assault Division before I went to Vietnam. So I had almost 700 hours of flight time by the time I got to Vietnam. I had plenty of training. We were well trained.
When you were training in 61 and 62, did you know you were training to go to Vietnam?
Yes, we knew that, It was pretty common talk.
When did Vietnam start?
Oh, it was, Vietnam was in the 50s. In 1961, I think, is when we first got ourselves involved.
That was when the United States got involved.
Yes, Kennedy started making commitments, I think, to them at that time. We slowly worked our way in 1964. is when we got committed to going to Vietnam, and then we left in October of 65.
Back on the helicopters, I guess I was thinking that Vietnam was where helicopters were first used, but they were first used in Korea.
Yes, very sparingly. We didn't
Okay.
have the fleets that we have here now. They had never been taught. From what I read, they had been toying with the idea because of what happened in World War II with paratroopers. They lost so many units and gliders, and which was their way of delivering the troops into combat zone, the gliders. And so they saw the helicopter as a way to move forces into a battle area really fast and efficiently, more efficiently than using paratroopers were. I don't know if you've read anything about how the paratroop units worked, but for more often than not, they were so scattered all over the battlefield. And then you have the wind blowing them, and
My dad was in World War II, and he was a waist gunner in the Army Air Force. And the only experience I know that he had with jumping out of a plane is when his plane was hit by flak, and they had to.
sure.
And he ended up landing in a tree. So I can imagine what happened with the paratroopers. I mean, dropping a whole bunch of them, and
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, they left a lot hanging from trees and things like that, I think.
like sitting ducks.
hmm
So you went to Vietnam in 65.
Yeah, the latter part of 65, yes.
Were you one of the first boots on the ground?
Well, when we landed an entire division in July 65 through the end of 65, even before the Iadrang happened, and that was on November, we had several skirmishes that we were involved in. This is strange because we took our aircraft in early or May or June of 1965, and we turned them over to a maintenance battalion that mothballed all the helicopters. Mothballing, I'm talking about wrapping them to protect them from the sea, moisture and whatnot, okay, salt spray and things like that. So they were put on carriers, and they were called Liberty ships from World War II. They were nothing more than a freighter with a deck put on top of it to launch aircraft. And so we're riding this thing. The USNS Croton was our ship. So they wrapped these aircraft up. They shipped them by rail down to the Louisiana port, and that's where the ship came in, and they loaded them aboard the ship, and we sailed out of Louisiana going to Vietnam. We had a deck full of helicopters up on top, and then they had put a lot in the hold. So as we're sailing along, there was nothing to do on the ship, so oftentimes I could go up on the deck and crawl in a helicopter in the cockpit and just sit there and write home or listen to tape or something like that. And then at other times do it in the hold somewhere where our helicopters were. And then when we got to Vietnam, of course, we pulled into the port at Quy Nhon, and they reassembled the aircraft. They had put the rotor blades back on them, ran them up, and pulled in a pilot and said, take this and go here on the map. This is where you're going. Take the ship. It's downloaded that way.
Did you study the makeup of Vietnam so you knew where to go, where to fly to, or how to fly there?
No, we were given a map and that's it. We had a tactical map and we could follow the map. It was very clear. In Vietnam at that point in time, the Highway 19 cut Vietnam in half from the East Coast all the way to Cambodia. So when they said, just follow this highway and you'll see where An Khê is, and they'll give you instructions when you come in range of the radio, they'll give you instructions on landing. So that was it. We were very versatile. Of course, it was very basic for everybody. The traffic, air traffic wasn't all that heavy, there wasn't interference with other air around there. So it was pretty simple stuff, really.
And you're still in the Army, even though you're flying.
Yes. Yeah, you're still a member of the Army,
Yeah.
so it's just, you're a soldier just like everybody else.
Yeah.
If the ship went down, you had to fight like a soldier. That's
Yeah.
really all it was.
When you got in your helicopter and you flew to what city?
When they launched me, I was talking to the radio on the ground at Quy Nhon, and they'd give me directions. They'd say, fly to the west and pick up the road, and you're on your way. You flew so far, and then they turn you over to radio contact at An Khê, which was where the division was at that point in time. And they had secured the area. They had a landing area, and it was all secured. And the troops were all on the ground, so we just flew on in there.
What were you flying then?
It's the UH-1Ds. They were Hueys.
What was your job once you flew there?
I was a warrant officer, and my job was to be proficient at flying. I had to learn map reading. I had to learn how to navigate to get from one place to another. So if they say, Moreno, we want you to pick up this ship and take this load of whatever it is to such and such coordinates, and there you contact so-and-so, and they'll land you, and you drop off your load, and then you get further instructions from there. And so that's the essence of what we did. But we were assigned to one unit, and we left that unit, and we were accountable to that unit. So we went out and did a job for the unit. When we were done, we'd call back and say, what do I do next?
Did you ever have the opportunity to carry soldiers from one place to the other?
Oh, that's all I did.
So it wasn't like to take a bag of sugar or food someplace. It was to take soldiers and drop them off.
Yes,
And
ammunition or supplies or arms and that sort of thing.
how challenging was that?
How challenging?
Yeah.
It was a challenge every time that we lifted off because we were in a hostile area, and so we were subject to receive fire. We were fortunate enough that we were facing small arms fire most of the time. They did not have heavy anti-aircraft guns. They did not have, but they had the AK-47, which is very, very good at a small arms weapon for assault. And they could shoot down a Huey with no trouble at all. So we learned to climb out and stay out of range. And we could fly over an area at 1,000 feet, and they'd take shots at us, and you could hear the report when it fired. And then oftentimes you'd hear the round hit the blade or sometimes hit the aircraft. So you took a chance on it, but for the most part, we went through that quite safely. As long as you stayed out of range, you didn't tempt anybody.
Did you have like formations? Like, did you fly just by yourself or did you fly with other Hueys?
Yes, we had a standard operating procedure that we never flew one ship alone. We always sent two ships. In the event that one went down, the other one would be there to help them out. We want to recover our crews because we had a lot invested in aviation people. And then they had arms on board, so they wanted to recover that. We flew in increments of two. When you say you're going to fly a company, we're talking about 16 to 18 ships. Then you would form them up in platoons. Platoon was made of 2 aircraft followed by 2 aircraft. They're assigned as Yellow 1 through Yellow 4. And there were standard formations that we flew in, echelon left or echelon right. That means that a helicopter would be flying. If you're flying echelon left, your wingman would be on your left side. If you want to fly echelon left for the entire thing, you would have the first 2 with one behind the other on the left side, then the other one behind that one, and forming one line flying in that direction. But most of the time, the first 2 aircraft were flying echelon left, and then the next formation would be 2 ships flying echelon right. And that would be the first platoon. And so then they were really tucked in tight. I mean, we trained to where we could fly at night with rotors overlapping as we flew in formation, just by stacking one aircraft over another.
That's kind of close, isn't it?
It was very close. Matter of fact, the way I would fly is that if I flew on my commander, I'm in the right seat. I could fly here on the left-hand side of him and watch. I learned to read every movement that they make. You could see the plane of the rotor. And when he tipped the rotor to the left, you knew he was going to turn left. So immediately I could and stay with him on formation like that. So with that blade turning outside my window.
You have to be able to read somebody's mind.
Almost, yes. But we got to be that good and that close. That was the only unit that I know functioned that way. We ran into a lot of static from people that objected to it, from in-country people that were in other units. What happened is that when we got to Vietnam, after 6 months there, they started bringing people in from units that were already there, and we were taking ours and sending them to them, trading them back and forth. That's so we would not have to rotate everybody back at one time. We went over as a unit, and you stay there for a year. At the end of the year, you're going to bring them back. You can't bring them all back. So they started infusing people back and forth. So a guy would come on the infusion program, and they'd see how we flew, and they totally objected to that. See, you guys are dangerous. I've never learned to fly that way, and I'm not going to fly that way. And some refused to do it. It got to be contentious sometimes.
Was that your greatest challenge in flying, dealing with that, or what were the other challenges?
There's a way to coerce people. If they want to succeed, they'll bend. So no, the training, it got to where the commander says this is what it's going to be, and if you're going to be part of that unit, then that's the way it's going to be. So they would change, and so we made concessions, but for the most part, the unit progressed just like it had before.
Did you stay in that one area, or did you alternate out too?
For the most part, we operated out of Ankei. The whole year I was there. On the ship going to Vietnam, it took 30 days to get us there. So we would listen to radio reports about what was going on in the war, and there were independent units that were operating there. The 173rd Airborne Brigade, for example. They were operating as a separate unit. The way we listened to what was going on and the successes they were having, we were very joyous about it. Say, hey, by the time we get there, those guys will have taken care of the war. The war's going to be over. Well, what we didn't know is that North Vietnam had other ideas. About the time that we rolled in, they brought in several divisions out of North Vietnam, and that's where we encountered them at the Ia Drang Valley in 1965, which was one of our biggest battles that we had there.
What made it a big battle?
Well, for us, our people had anticipated that they wanted to engage the North Vietnamese somewhere in the area because they knew that North Vietnam had this idea of cutting South Vietnam in half along Highway 19, which was where we were landing. We had Quy Nhon, An Khê to Pleiku to the Cambodian border. That's the way the highway ran. It was a good landmark for them to target to cut the country in half. If they could control the upper half and they leave us on the lower half. Well, our commanders had seen that strategically, that's what they wanted to do, so they decided that they'd put us right on Highway 19 in An Khê. And the North Vietnamese surrounded a special forces camp south of Pleiku. The place called Plei Mi was the name of it. Well, there was a special forces camp was there, and they surrounded it, and they held it hostage for several months. And then we went into Pleiku, and they decided that they'd send a South Vietnamese force in there to try to break the blockade they had on it. And that unit got ambushed. We knew it was going to get ambushed because that's the way the North Vietnamese played the game. They take a hold of a position that they wanted to neutralize, and they'd hold it until a relief force came in. They'd ambush the relief force and that way prevail. But this time they ran into the American forces, and we had helicopters. So we brought them in, and we came in force and engaged them, and they broke off their hold on the special forces camp, and they moved their units in towards the Cambodian border. So our division decided that, well, they were going to pursue them, and so we took a force, the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, which was a regiment, and we inserted them into a place called the Ia Drang Valley. And what we didn't know is that they had enemy forces on that mountain called the Chupong Mountain that overlooked the landing zone. They had close to 7 times as many troops as we had. We had a 7-to-1 advantage over us. They had 3 regiments operating in that area. And so that quickly became one of the most significant battles of the war. We went through and we decimated their forces. We destroyed at least 1 regiment and really wounded another one, but they also attacked our 2nd Battalion and decimated that, so they both claimed victory. But there were a lot of troops that were killed, both sides, in that battle. But it became more significant battles of the war. We got to a point in the battle when the commander saw that the enemy was rolling in so many troops that he had to make a decision on what he was going to do from there on, or how he's going to conduct the battles. But he pulled back the landing zone and he said, I don't want to have an aircraft hit and block the landing zone, so I'm pulling off all the helicopters for now. So you take whatever elements of the unit you got back and wait for me to call for them. So we landed 8 ships to begin with of troops. They took their position, and after the landings of those 8 ships, they broke off and sent them back to Plei Mi to wait for word from the commander. My commander heard on the radio that they were depleting their basic load of ammunition and they would need reinforcements, so he decided he'd go back and got a couple of ships and said, we're going to start flying ammunition into them. So I was one of those ships that was selected to go in. And so we started a round robin type thing of going in and delivering the ammunition, water, and rations. And then on our second trip in, we engaged the medevac people to come in, and they were going to bring their ships in to evacuate the wounded that were piling up. So we asked them to follow us in. We flew on in, and they came in behind us, and they hadn't landed. One was still hovering when they got hit by small arms fire. The one that was on the ground took one casualty on board and took off. The second one got his windshield blown out, so he didn't even land. He just took off. And so we were left without any medevac capabilities. My commander at that point in time decided that we would take the casualties that we could. Even though we were delaying, it was because we had configured our helicopters to take combat troops in, and the seats were in place for them to load up. We couldn't take casualties because we couldn't lay them down. After that, we made do. I had my gunner and my crew chief would get out, and they would pick up casualties off the ground. And if they could, they'd sit them in the aircraft. If not, they lay them down where they could. So we would carry out 5 or 6 at a time. And some of them died right in the ship as we were coming back. But my ship pulled out 33 over 14 flights that we made in there. The other ship we were flying with, there was a flight of 2. The other ship pulled 39 out. But they were all mangled. I mean, it was not good. When they got back, they had their uniforms torn off. They had rags where they'd been hit. We had body parts laying in the aircraft that the crew chief had to wash out when we landed back at the other place. Because, we couldn't continue to take troops and shuttle troops around with all that stuff floating around on the floor in the helicopter. So that was hard on my crew chief and my gunner because they were picking up people. And I don't know if Beckom mentioned anything about it, but in his letter, he's quite clear what he saw. The same thing is that he saw troops laying on the ground that were twitching, as they're dying. Just like, and the way he described it is that like chickens with their heads cut off, they're jumping around, the body's jumping around and that sort of thing. That was over the entire time of that battle. And we flew that from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 10:30 at night, getting those people reinforced. And finally, they solidified their position. We brought in the rest of the unit, and everything was okay. They ultimately made it. I mean, we lost a lot of people, but they ultimately consolidated, and we were able to drive off the enemy force.
You think that was your greatest challenge while you were there?
It was for me, yes. Now, I got shot down. Well, I got wounded about 30 days later when we were called in to ask if we might be able to evacuate some people. And we were told to stay away from anything where we could lose an aircraft. And so I called the unit and asked them if they were cold, and they said, yeah, we were engaged, but the enemy's pulled back and we've got 5 casualties. Can you come and get them? So I asked them where they were, and they told me, and they were a little ditch in a rice paddy. And so I flew over it, and it looked clear to me. So I went around and made my approach and landed. We landed right next to the ditch and where the unit was, and the wounded were. They said they had a company commander that had 5 rounds in his belly, and we needed to get him out of there. So parked right next to him, and the next thing you know is we got hit from the right-hand side. The guys were in elephant grass, not more than 50 feet away, and the guy would stand up and fire a burst and then lay down in the grass again. It took my gunner, Kumba, a couple of times to finally take him out, but I kept saying, Kumba, you got to do something. You got to do something. They shot away his machine gun. The one burst came and knocked out the machine gun on the right-hand side where my gunner was. And so he picked up his M16, and when he picked up the M16, the guy fired next burst and shot that gun out of his hand. Then the third time, he just finally, and Kumba was cursing pretty heavily on the intercom because he couldn't fathom what the hell was going on. So he finally just timed it just right, firing from in the left-hand position. He fired back across out of the ship to the right rear, and he killed the guy that had been harassing us. But we'd already taken several hits. I think we took something like 52 rounds were hit the aircraft. We didn't know how bad we were hit, but we took our casualties and flew out of there. And when we landed at the field hospital, we shut down the aircraft because we knew we were critically hit. And sure enough, when we inspected the rotor head, we got this pinch bowl tubes that control for the controls. And we had rounds through those tubes that were holding just minuscule pieces were holding those tubes together, and it just so happened that we didn't put too much force on those because they would have split. We were very lucky there. And then I got through that okay. My wound was very superficial. I had a blast. It hit the pilot's seat over there on the co-pilot side. And we got ceramic and stainless steel plates that they put in there. Well, it hit the ceramic and it just blasted all over the place. And the bullet ricocheted and went into the inside of my leg here. And I saw the blood come through my pants. And I said, oh my gosh, and then I felt the blast, it hit me. And I said, what's going on? And all my entire sleeve was just covered with just little drops of blood, with the shrapnel. Then my face, I felt something on my face, and sure enough, I had blood on my gloves. So my co-pilot, he says, what the hell is the matter with you? And I didn't know what to say to him. I was in shock. He says, I've got the aircraft. I'll fly it. Okay. So I just took my hands off the controls. And as it turned out, the bullet that went in there was just nothing more than a spent bullet, and the doctor just reached in with his forceps and probed around, pulled the bullet out and gave it to me. He said, put it in my hand. He said, that's yours. That was that experience. And then 30 days later, while I was in an operation in the vicinity of that area, I flew in a mission that I was the number 2 aircraft to go in, and they said, we got to reinforce that, and it's a 1-ship landing zone. They knew we were qualified to go in there, so they just mission said, Frank, you're number 2. I said, okay. So I set it up, and I could tell I was about a mile behind the 1-ship that was landing, and I could see the green tracers from the North Vietnamese guns that were crisscrossing the LZ as the guy flew in there. And then I watched him land. He dropped his troops, and then I saw him take off. And he take off. It was because it was a very confined area. It had 100-foot trees on the departure side, and I saw him climb on out, straight on up, and then turn and left. And I set my approach in to come in behind him as he was departing. And when I came across the opening into the trees there, I got hit with a machine gun from the left-hand side that knocked out my engine. At that point, I was 50 to 100 feet off the ground, so my aircraft I allowed it to settle down, and I had enough rotor RPM to where I could control it all the way to the ground. So the aircraft was totally undamaged except for that burst that hit the engine. And so I spent the night there that night. My crew was there. We hunkered down. I mean, we had the first aircraft that landed had 6 men aboard, 6 soldiers aboard. Mine had 6 soldiers aboard, so we had 12 Americans. And the rest in the landing zone was a Montagnard company, and that was the indigenous type personnel run by the special forces people. We thought we would reinforce them to keep the enemy off them that night, so fortunately, we stayed in there with them. I guess those 12 guys made a difference. Our artillery ringed the landing zone all night, so they kept them off our back. And then the next morning, they had broken contact and they left. So that was probably the worst that I've ever seen. My second tour was almost uneventful because I flew Cobras, and all I did was fly around behind scouts, and they'd find targets for me, and I'd shoot, and then we'd come back and report what we'd found.
So when they tell you to shoot, you're shooting at the Vietnamese, the North Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
But you're high enough that you're not getting shot at?
Yes. When I was flying the Cobra, we would fly in low enough to hit our target, and sometimes we would come within range of their weapons. So yeah, they had an opportunity to take us down. That's just something that we chanced.
So your first tour was when you were shot down and injured, and then you signed up to do it again. Was that like your second year?
In my second year, yes. I came back from my first tour in Vietnam, and I accepted a battlefield commission in Vietnam. So I went from a warrant officer to a second lieutenant, a commissioned officer. And so that triggered totally different assignments for me. It pulled me out of the warrant officer ranks, which have assigned me strictly to flight duties. And they said, now you're commissioned as an armor officer. You've got to be able to lead troops in cavalry and armor. So I came back assigned to an armor unit at Fort Knox, Kentucky, where the tank units were and the cavalry units were. So my career took off on a totally different direction. My second tour, even though what they did is they took officers who were assigned to cavalry, okay? They have air cavalry. So I was assigned from being a warrant officer aviator to a second lieutenant in armored cavalry, and I was assigned to an air cavalry unit in the States that was forming up to go to Vietnam. So when I came back, I joined that unit. There were 2 cavalry regiments that were mobilized, and one was a 3rd of the 17th Cavalry, and one was 7th of the 17th Cavalry. And I was in a 3rd of the 17th Cavalry, and we trained separately from the other cavalry unit. And we weren't the only cavalry people in the Army at the time or in Vietnam. It just so happened we were separate units being moved to Vietnam.
What was the difference in the 2 tours?
My mission.
Your mission on your first tour was to...
It was an assault helicopter. That was our mission, assaulting. If you can look at it from a standpoint where you have cavalry, armored personnel carriers that carry troops into the battle, or with paratroopers, we had aircraft that flew them into the battle. The concept behind the air assault was have helicopter units that are designed and trained to carry troops into the battle. The mission changes when you get into an air cavalry unit, because now you're looking at a composite organization that has scouts for going out there and running around and seeing what's out there with the enemy. And they're in the LOHs, light observation helicopters. So then you have each small contingent has, and they call them cavalry squadrons, with smaller cavalry units, like company-sized units that make up that regiment. Okay, so you have A troop, they call them troops, B troop, C troop, and D troop. A troop has helicopters that are able to deliver a platoon into battle. They have the scouts as an entity that can scout around and find a place that will be safe for this infantry unit. And then you have a contingent of gunships. So all these 3 things make that component. And you have 3 such units. You have A, B, C, and D troops. D troop is strictly gunships. They have gunship capability and aerial rocket capability. The other 3 troops are what they call maneuver troops. They would be able to take a platoon in with each one of them and drop it in position, and have scouts that protect them, and then have lift ships that will support them.
Did you sign up for a 3rd tour?
No, ma'am. No, by that time I'd had it. I was ready to come home.
What was the most rewarding part of your service?
The most rewarding was the opportunity that they gave me to excel. When I first started looking into what I wanted to do, I still feel that there were some forces that were keeping me from advancing, because I was a Mexican-American kid, okay? And I watched so many of my friends, like we went through flight school, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I was the only one that made it through my flight school class. We had several Hispanics, but none of them made it through. Blacks, none. So they were being very selective over who did it, and I was just lucky that I made it. And then, as I progressed along, I was well taken care of, because I think I had good performance reviews all the way through. And then that gave me the opportunity when they were looking for commissioned officers. I was selected for that. And I think from there, my career really took off well. And that was a very promising thing for me. They gave me the opportunity, I took it, and I really moved along. Age caught up with me, though, because my contemporaries were all much younger.
But that makes you the more senior one, even though you're still a young person.
Yeah, that's true. But there were competing forces. A lot of things happened in the military when I got to be a senior captain. I was competing with a lot of people who were very polished, very well trained to become a major. It just so happened that I ran across a guy by the name of George Patton. He was my command when I was at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I happened to go to Europe on what they call Brigade 75, when they would take full brigade out of the armored division and rotate it to Europe to replace another one over there. It's just something they wanted to do, to be able to show that they could move around and determine what Air Force capability there was that could move these units over there and that sort of thing. Before I went over there, I saw Patton, and he said, "You do this successfully, you perform well, and you'll be a major by the time you get back." And sure enough, that's the way it happens. The opportunity was there. It's just who's going to take advantage of it. I did as much as I could. I was very fortunate.
When you left the military, you were a major.
Yes.
What made you make the decision to not re-enlist?
To get out of the military?
Yeah.
Career potential. I had an opportunity to get into the War College. I could have signed up to do a lot of work online and become competent in that area at the higher levels. But like I said, I knew who I was competing with, and I had the opportunity to say, I can continue to compete and maybe be successful, maybe not, or I can choose to finish my master's degree and go into civilian life. At that time, my family was getting tired of the military. They knew things were dragging a little bit, so it wasn't too much to say that I'll try civilian life and see what happens here on.
And what happened in your civilian life?
Well, I came back and I retired. I retired in Mississippi. That was my last assignment. I was an advisor to the National Guard there. That was in the 70s. I got out in 1980 and I came here in 1985, so in 75, I guess it was, that I was in Mississippi, and I finished my master's degree about the time that I came here in 1980. I was an instructor for Embry-Riddle University for a while, but I went to work at the nuclear plant for Arizona Public Service Company. When I first got out of the service, I was working for Mississippi Power and Light Company, which had a nuclear plant down in Louisiana. And a friend of mine came out here, and they were building 3 units here out at Palo Verde, a nuclear plant. And so he called me and he says, I have a position for you if you want to come out here. So naturally, having come from here, my roots were here, I thought it would be good for me to come back. And they had a position for me, and I wasn't all that happy with it, but I took it anyway. And I was with Arizona Public Service Company for several years. I started out in operations and operations systems, and then moved from there to auditing. Then I went into procurement. I served several positions with APS. And then finally I just said that I think I'll just get out but I didn't. I came and they had an opportunity for someone to come and to join the fuel trading and purchasing at corporate headquarters in downtown Phoenix. And so I joined that group and I stayed with them for several years. And then from there, I just saw the light. I had to move on, get out, retire. And then I went to work for real estate. I did real estate work for a while. But at that point in time, my wife was very ill with cancer, and she was terminal cancer. So I had to ride that out. That was a pretty tough time. I finally gave it up, and I had to spend more time with her. And then she passed on in 2008. So,
what is your family like today?
My daughters are all here. They've got their families here. 2 of my daughters that are married, both their husbands have cancer. And so my youngest daughter, her husband's suffering from throat cancer, and she's having a very hard time going through that one than the other one. And she's got a husband that has a traumatic brain injury, and he's dealing with cancer. So Hodgkin's disease and that sort of thing. So, I mean, it pretty well stifles what I'm doing, you know. And then I'm going blind, so my wife does all the driving. We carry one of the husbands from here to City of Hope in Goodyear, usually once or twice a week. So that keeps my wife busy there. So, and then if I want to go to the gym, I have to ask her to carry me to the gym, and she's got to spend time with me there because of my blindness. She has to track me as I go through the gym. So it's pretty hectic, I think.
It's a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make Vietnam look easy?
Indeed. Yeah, in Vietnam, I was very, you talk about dynamic, you know, it was very active the whole time. I mean, I was absent from my family and I missed them certainly, but the activity that we were responsible for was just really something I truly enjoyed, yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No. I think we pretty well covered the salient positions on almost everything. You got everything out of me that I could possibly think of, and a lot of it is fading because I can't remember much of anything.
Yeah,
I get asked things, and as a matter of fact, you know, I guess you know that Elvis is writing my story. Oftentimes I will go through things like we sit there and talk about any given thing, and by the time he's done with it, he'll go and examine it, and they'll come back and ask questions that trigger things. And, you know, a lot of times I don't know how I got from A to B on that discussion, but he causes me to go back and think about what it is that I said that made him think that.
He's been there, so he knows, okay, so in order to get from A to B, you had to have done this. So what was that you did?
He can relate to this.
Well, I thank you for talking to me.
You're welcome.
If you are a veteran, or if you know someone who is, I urge you to share your story. Whether you fought in battle or worked behind the scenes, your experience matters. It's not just history, it's our history. It's a history we cannot afford to lose. At Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel, we are committed to preserving these stories, but we need your help. Subscribe and share it with your friends and family. And most importantly, if you have a story to tell, reach out to us on social media or email. Both are listed in our description. Every veteran story deserves to be heard, remembered, and honored. So join us in this journey. Together, we can ensure that the legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel live on. This is Diana Maul Halstead, the Kriegie's daughter, signing off. Thank you for listening, and to all veterans, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service and your sacrifice. If you would like to purchase a copy of my dad's memoir, Writings from the Barbed Wire Hotel, click the link in the description. In the back of almost 800 pages is an index of all the sources I used to research my dad's military career and time as a prisoner of war. Let's spread the word and keep these stories alive. And remember, every story matters, especially yours. Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel was written by and produced by Diana Maul Halstead, the Kriegie's daughter. Until next time, this is Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel. Stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the sacrifices made for our freedom. Thanks for listening.